Hello everyone, my name is the Hurricane Geek. Today we're going to be talking about our 2021 Atlantic hurricane season forecast. Now this forecast is going to be a little bit different than many of other forecasts you've seen before. This one's actually going to be talking about specific landfall dates and when and what states are going to be the hotspot. I have two main hotspots, and then there's a secondary one that is also a hotspot. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about specific dates, not just talking about numbers. Most people, when they give you a forecast, they spit out numbers and they tell you that this is going to happen. But the thing about that is you could have 30 named storms and most of those storms could be weak, right? So what really matters is about the landfalls, and this year the landfalls really are going to be about the same as last year, what we saw last year. So that I'm not expecting much of a difference, even though we saw so many named storms last year and hurricanes and major hurricanes. I'm not expecting a big difference in terms of landfall. Tropical storm, that was abnormal. 13 tropical storms was a little bit abnormal. First, I'm going to talk about why this season will be active, and then we'll get into my forecast. So we're first going to start off with sea surface temperatures right now, and recently the MDR and Gulf and really the Caribbean, really all the deep tropics, generally have been warming recently. So that's just a sign of things to come. Climate models were expecting this, and that's what's occurring. Right now, the temperatures across the whole Atlantic basin generally running about average to slightly above average. It's above average in the subtropics, but down near the deep tropics, it's still about average right now. Now, as we look over into the Enzo region, it's still about neutral. Nothing's going to change there, so I'm not expecting anything there. And I'm not really going to be talking about this area because we know it's going to be active this year. So that's that. And then kind of off near the Eastern Pacific, where we have that development zone in the Eastern Pacific, it's kind of about average. So it's not the best, and that just tells you that Pacific generally will be suppressed while the Atlantic is going to be more conducive for development. So that's the sea surface temperatures. This is the 7-day change map as a whole. So if you look recently, the temperatures have been warming pretty good in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's not necessarily a good sign because June we're seeing multiple cycles cycle through in the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to see the 1019 part of the cycle. I just talked about that on my last video, that one's going to cycle early June, and it doesn't mean that it's going to develop, but we definitely are going to see some moisture in Florida. The second cycle will be Zeta. That one will happen mid-June and affect Louisiana, kind of the eastern part, and then the next cycle would be Eta, so that one would impact the west coast of Florida as well, mostly coming out of the Caribbean most likely. So we're going to be watching those three cycles mainly. There is going to be a secondary cycle off our east coast, and that's why we could have a secondary hotspot. The Carolinas could be, the Outerbanks could be a secondary hotspot. Because we have multiple cycles cycling off our west coast, there's a better chance that the Carolinas will be impacted this year because there's going to be a lot of recurvatures kind of heading up the state of the peninsula and then heading back out in the open water off the east coast. So that could be a problem. The Carolinas could be at risk this year as well. But the main two hotspots that I'm expecting are Louisiana and Florida, particularly the west coast and then down to South Florida. So you can see this is the close-up image, and yeah, it's warming a lot, especially in, again, the western part. So in the Gulf of Mexico off the east coast, it's warming, and this is where we could see our development, our cycles cycle through, right? And in the Caribbean, it's also warming, and up into the main development region, it's also warming. This is the real-time sea surface temperatures, and you can see it's very warm in the Gulf of Mexico. It's really conducive all throughout the Gulf of Mexico now. So our last video we showed there were still some 25, 24 kind of up in this northern Gulf area, northeastern Gulf area. Now that's all warming up, and you could see that mainly the whole Gulf is warm now. Now the Caribbean is also very warm, especially in the kind of south of Cuba. It's very warm there, and then the Bay of Campeche is also very warm. And again, our cycle, 1019 cycle, would probably cycle in this zone here. So it's conducive there. So that's why we need to watch that. Okay, now as we head into our next image, this is the ocean heat content, and you can see it's very warm in the again, south of Cuba, very warm, and that's not good, I guess, particularly for Eta, because Eta formed down here. If Eta did want to cycle down in the Caribbean, it would that could increase our chances of maybe seeing a late June, early July hurricane. It's not common though to see hurricanes in late June, early July. So again, we just have to wait and see. The end of June with the cycle Eta, that one could be a little interesting. We have to watch that one. This is the MDR temperatures, the 7-day change of the MDR, and you can see it's warming there too. Those oranges show that it's been warming the past 7 days, and that's probably going to continue for the next several days as the European model shows westerly winds heading across the MDR for, again, the next several days, at least 7 days. And then same goes with the Gulf. The Gulf is also warming. So if we go throughout this image, you can see those reds there. Those reds kind of stick around in those areas, particularly for a while. You can see these two areas that I'm talking about, kind of in the Gulf. In this area, it's going to continue to warm for at least another 7 days, most likely. And then in the main development region as well, it'll probably continue to warm for, again, at least another 5 to 6 days before it starts cooling again. Because again, the ocean, they go through cycles. You know, it's going to be warming, it's going to be cooling. But for the most part, as we head into the peak, it's mostly going to be warming. Okay, there's going to be changes, there's going to be fluctuations, but for the most part, it will be warming down in the deep tropics from here on out. Okay, and you can see very strong cooling happening in the subtropics, and that will most likely stay with us during the peak. This hurricane season could become hyperactive, but I'm not too concerned about the number of storms that form. I'm more concerned about the landfalls. So in my definition, we could see that. We could see a hyperactive season in terms of landfalls, but you know, name storms, that's not really what I do. I forecast landfalls, I don't really forecast name storms. That's that. And then here is the Cfs model. This model has been consistently showing warmer than average deep tropical, in a deep tropical MDR. It's been consistently showing warmer than average temperatures to happen during the peak. And that's exactly what this model shows still. So this model has been showing this now. Even during the spring predictability barrier, it was still showing these warmer temperatures to kind of show up. We can go back 3 months ago, it was still showing these warmer temperatures in the peak. You can see how we're starting to warm, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now, right? In the main development region in the Gulf, it starts to warm, it's already starting to warm up. And you can see that happening. By July, we're already starting to see above average temperatures in that area. August, it mostly all above average, the whole Atlantic, which is not a good sign because temperatures are really important for the Atlantic basin. That's one huge factor. And when you have all these, when you just have the whole Atlantic basin like that, it's not good. Now, 2020 was abnormally warm. This year's not going to be as warm, obviously, but it's still going to be bad. We don't want to see these warmer temperatures. Like, I mean, look at that. Near September, near Florida, it's very warm. So that's not a good sign. And then in October, it stays that way. So that's the temperatures for the CFS. I'm pretty accurate predicting that. That scenario is pretty accurate based on what we're seeing right now. We're seeing that warming happen in the deep tropics now. So, and then the Cfs model was showing the same pattern. If you look throughout this run, it was a little bit later. I think this is going to happen a little bit earlier, but you could see by September, it was mostly warm throughout the whole entire deep tropics. So again, it's kind of more conservative on it, but I think the CFS is a pretty good analysis of it. This is the NMME model. So this is another climate model that we look at. And you can see in the Atlantic, it is definitely warmer than average. That's what the model was predicting. Now, off in the Enzo region, I don't expect it to be that cold. So again, some models have biases. They want to make it cooler in the Enzo region. It's not going to be that cold, obviously, because we're already in a neutral phase, and it's going to stay that way most likely. So yeah, the model's analysis on the Enzo, not so good, but the temperatures in the Atlantic, I would say, look like they're going to turn out that way, so that's not a good sign. And another thing that's really important that we look at, this was a tweet by Eric Webb. This is taking in, it's kind of like a super blend of all the climate models that we look at or meteorologists look at. Yeah, so it gives you like an average. It spits out like an average. What are all these models thinking? And it spits that out, and you put it on a Mercator projection like this, and you could see that that's not the most favorable setup, but it's close, right? We have upward motion over Africa, Indian Ocean region near Madagascar, and then we're having that spill over into the Atlantic on the west coast of Africa. So you can see that's just going to set up that strong monsoon, and it's going to set up those strong waves coming off. They may not develop in the main development region, but they will develop closer to home. And that's kind of what I expect this year. I don't expect too many long track storms this year. If there are going to be long track storms, they're going to be in the northern Caribbean. So that's that. And then you can see in the central part of your screen, or the central Pacific, you can see that there's downward motion, and that's going to persist. And that's why the Pacific's suppressed. Now, this is one thing that I want to point out. The hyperactive seasons, this is another tweet made by Eric Webb. This is taking in all the hyperactive seasons that we've seen during that climatology period. And you can see that generally speaking, in the hyperactive seasons, the suppressed air was mostly over the eastern Pacific. So the difference between 2021 and a hyperactive season is 2021 is wanting to focus the suppressing air kind of more over the central South Pacific, while this model, or the hyperactive seasons, tend to focus their air over the Eastern Pacific. So again, it's not, the models aren't pointing towards a hyperactive season in terms of velocity, but they are still forecasting a very active season. So now we are going to get into our 2021 hurricane forecast. I'm just going to let you know before showing you this, it is going to be a little bit confusing, but if you don't understand it, I did post a few other videos back that may, kind of help you understand a little bit better. Okay, now we're going to be talking about our 2021 hurricane forecast. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on why this season could be particularly active. So now we're going to show you my forecast. Now this is going to be a little bit confusing, and if you are confused, you can tweet me on Twitter if you want to ask some questions. My Twitter is going to be in the description if you want to check it out. That would be good. I'm always going to be posting about the cycles, and again, the cycles coming up, I'm going to be posting about those as well. So, but in this video, I'm going to show you all the cycles that are going to cycle throughout each month. I'm going to show you my numbers. I'm going to show you my landfall numbers. I'm going to show you the organizations that we're predicting the 2021 forecast, and I'm going to show you maps that I created that correlate with the LRC, and I'm going to explain the LRC because a lot of you probably don't know what the LRC is, and that's my job. I'm going to explain that. So first we're going to look at the forecasts. These are the four main ones that we tend to look at. You can see the average there is in the vertical column, so you have 14, 7, and 3. That's usually your average. That's the new average for the new decade. And then you can see on the horizontal line you have the forecasts. So CSU is calling for 17 tropical storms, 8 and 4, and so on and so forth. So we have the CSU, Colorado State University, then we have Tropical Storm Risk, then we have the Weather Company, and then we have NOAA. They're all forecasting an above average season, and generally the three columns, the three horizontal columns, those three forecasts there, those are pointing towards my forecast. So this is my forecast: 17 to 20 named storms, 8 to 10 hurricanes, and 45 major hurricanes. This is, in my mind, 85% accuracy for this. Now, when you look at numbers and named storms, there's really no certainty to know how many named storms are going to develop. Like in 2020, no one was predicting 30 named storms. You could say that, but no one was predicting that. No one was going to just say, oh, we're going to see 30 named storms. No one could predict that. So, but this is generally what we're seeing right now in the climate models. What I just showed you, the temperatures, the velocity potential, those things are kind of adding up. The ENSO being neutral as well, adding up all those things together, and this is what we come up with, and we come up with an above average season. And it could spill over into hyperactive, but again, I'm not forecasting the named storms. I am, because I'm giving you a forecast, but that's not my goal. So if I get this wrong, I don't really care. I care more about the landfalls. That's what I care about. So I'm going to show you that now. So this is what I'm thinking for the landfalls. Pretty similar to 2020, believe it or not. We had 6 hurricane landfalls and 1 major. So it's not that far off. Now, tropical storms, that was far off. I believe we had 12 tropical storms, or 11. It was either 11 or 12, because they took Marco off, or yeah, I think they took Marco off. So I think it was 11 tropical storms. But either way, this is what I'm thinking in terms of landfalls. Now, this is 65% accuracy, and I think that's a pretty good forecast there. 4 to 5 hurricanes and 2 majors. I think that's pretty good for what we're seeing on the LRC. The LRC is going to increase our chances to see hurricane landfalls this year, and I think that's a good analysis of it. So that's how many landfalls I'm predicting this year. And now we're going to look month by month. So I don't have an accuracy down there just because this is harder to predict, month by month. This is just giving you an idea. I don't expect this to be 100% correct. So I'm thinking we could see 2 tropical storms this month, or June, this upcoming month. Then for July, I think we could see 3 and 1, and so on and so forth. So again, September usually is the peak, climatology speaking. So that's why, September is the most active. And there are some reasons to that. I'll get to that in a little bit, but that's my month-to-month forecast there. What is the LRC? Well, to be honest, the LRC is basically making this forecast possible. Without the LRC, I wouldn't really be able to pinpoint exactly where our hotspots would be, and I wouldn't be able to specifically tell you the dates on when these cycles could be occurring. So without the LRC, it would be very difficult to make a forecast. So the LRC is called the Leezak Reoccurring cycle. It's a long-range forecasting method used by meteorologists to forecast the weather months in advance using cycles. Okay, so it was a meteorologist created this, Gary Leezak. He's in Kansas City meteorologist. He noticed that cycles were repeating every year, and every fall cycles develop. Okay, and it's not just for the tropics. This was for severe weather. This was for winter storms. But every fall, a new and unique cycle established itself, and it ran all the way through September, and then a new cycle started in early October, and that's what he noticed. So, and we can measure this on surface maps. So that's what I did over the summer. I looked at surface maps and I made charts, and I'm going to show you one of those charts today. So the cycles are established every year during early October to November, and then the cycles continue to cycle throughout the winter and summer months. Okay, so that's why I can only predict from June to September. I cannot predict October and November accurately. I just can't. There's no way I can, because a new and unique cycle will be establishing during that time. So that's basically the LRC. Now, this is what I'm predicting in terms of cycles for June, okay? And again, these cycles are mainly for landfalls. This is not, I'm not, because there could be some subtropical storms out there that that form, but those are not going to affect anyone. What I'm forecasting here is mainly the cycles that occurred close to home during that early October to November timeframe, and because that's when the new cycle established. It established last year in 2020 during that time, and now it's continuing all the way through September, and that's what we're seeing right now, and that's why we were able to get these cycles. So the 1019 cycle is going to be occurring early June, and I just made a video on that. We could see something near the western Florida coast. Will it be tropical? We don't know. It could just be moisture. And then Zeta will be cycling mid-June. So could that become tropical? Well, we have to wait and see. The models are still trying to figure things out. Okay, but that's another cycle that is a strong cycle. So the asterisks there, the ones that have asterisks, are the ones that are particularly strong. So the one that doesn't have an asterisk, that one wasn't as strong. The cycle wasn't as strong. But the Zeta and Eta and the 1019 cycle, those are all strong cycles that have repeated constantly during the winter months. Okay, the 1031 cycle, that one could happen throughout the season as well. I'm not saying that 4 tropical storms are going to develop here. I'm just saying that these are the cycles that we need to look out for June. Okay, and you can see those dates there, right? We have one for Western Florida. Then we have one for Eastern Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. That was Zeta. Then we have the 1031 cycle that was off our East Coast, and that's why the Carolinas could be a hotspot this year. And then we have the Eta part of the cycle, which was northwestern Florida. So those are cycles that we're going to be watching out for with the dates for June. And the Eta part of the cycle could spill over into July. That's possible. So now we're looking at the cycling of the 1019 part of the pattern. This pattern is the one we're watching right now. And I posted this on my Twitter. You could see it started near the Straits of Florida. It came up through the Gulf and then hit kind of near Tampa, the west coast of Florida region. So that's the cycle that we're going to be watching. Now, it doesn't mean that when these cycles occur, when they repeat in the hurricane season, it doesn't mean that they're going to be tropical all the time, and it does not mean that they're going to be cycling that exact track. They could start north of Cuba, or they could start down in the Caribbean, or they could start, in the Gulf. We don't know, but if it's during that time frame, if it's affecting an influence in our weather pattern during that time period that I'm forecasting, then that's part of the cycle. So you could see December 5th is when the next cycle happened. That was a cold front, brought some rain to South Florida, the Keys, and that was 48 days. It took 48 days for another new cycle to establish. And then cycle 3 took 44 days, and you can see there was a dry trough right down in that same area. Then cycle 4 took 47 days. So you can see how there's a pattern there. You had 48 days, then it went down to 44, then it went up again to 47. Okay, and then you had a stationary front near central Florida, and then again it went down to 44 again. See that? See how there's a pattern there? And then again, stationary front brought rain to central Florida. Then June 6th to the 9th, this is the area that we're forecasting now into the future, a week into the future really now. But I've been forecasting this for months now, but this gives you an idea. 48 to 51 days now, again, went up. So you can see that pattern there. Okay, it starts hot, it starts at 44, 48, then it goes down, up, up. And that's the area that we're watching right there. South Florida in particular could move up into the western coast. So that's what we're watching. The model's trying to figure it out. It's trying to show it. Will it be tropical? We don't know yet. but that's the cycle. Okay, so that's that cycling. Okay, and this happened with every cycle. This is just one 1019 part of the pattern. This is just one. You have the eta part of the pattern, then you have the zeta part of the pattern, then you have the delta part of the pattern. So this is just one of those patterns, okay, that cycled through. And again, if we go back, this is the one that I'm talking about right here, the early June one. So Zeta has been cycling throughout the winter months as well. Zeta has been doing that as well. And that one's going to happen mid-June, okay? Will it be tropical? Well, we just have to wait and see. But these have all been cycling, and they're all going to occur. They're all going to bring rain to these areas that are shown here. They're going to bring rain to them. They're going to bring some nasty weather. But are they going to develop? We don't know. But come hurricane season, the chances of things developing start to increase because the favorability starts to increase. Most likely, not all these are going to develop because there's 4 here, so I don't expect all to develop. But again, what my forecast was calling for month by month was 2. So, 2 out of 4 of these could develop. I think that's pretty reasonable. Now, as we go and look into July, and again, this gives you an idea on when we could see impacts and where, right? So these are the cycles that have been cycling. The 1120 part of the cycle was a cycle for Louisiana. This is actually the cycle that happened with Invest 91L in May, right? So near the mid to end of May, we had the Invest out in the Gulf of Mexico. That was the 1120 part of the pattern, okay? And that's why I put plus subtropics there, because what did we see out in the subtropics? We saw Ana. So the 1120 part of the cycle specifically needs to look out for Louisiana, okay? Now, I know Texas, Invest 91 did go after Texas, but that's just because the Bermuda High, that was in May, and the Bermuda High was over us. It was over Florida, so it pushed it more into Texas. As we get towards the peak of hurricane season, the Bermuda High is going to be out more towards Bermuda, like the name says. And that's going to allow more storms not to go as far west. So that's why Texas is not it's not going to be a hotspot this year, Texas. And for the most part, Texas could be avoided with any landfalls for the most part. So that's going to be really something to watch, and that's going to be really awesome if the LRC predicts that. If it predicts that Texas does not see anything, and the east coast of Florida does not see anything, and the Northeast does not see anything, that would be really interesting to see, because that's exactly what the LRC is calling for. So, but these again are the cycles that are going to occur during July. Okay, and you can look at this and pause the screen and look at these dates. These are when the cycles are going to repeat for July. Now, does it mean that all of them are going to develop? No, but these are the ones that we're going to need to watch out for. And again, during this time, when these cycles reoccur or repeat, I'm going to be showing this, and I'm going to be seeing if it lines up with what I was forecasting during this time. And we're going to see if it lines up with the models at the time. And if it does, great. That means that the prediction was accurate. So yeah, we'll be looking at this during the hurricane season and comparing and seeing how I did. This is for August. And again, those cycles that are not as strongly, so there's going to be some cycles that aren't as strong. The ones that have the asterisk have cycled and have cycled and have cycled over and over again, and they were strong. They were strongly depicted on surface maps. So when you look at the 1031 cycle, again, that was off our east coast, so I can't really pinpoint exactly if that one's going to develop. We don't know. But the ones that don't have question marks on, I think they have a pretty good, decent shot at development, because this is August now. I mean, August is usually always going to be favorable in a year like this. Same goes with September. When you look at this, there's a chance we could see a major hurricane landfall in August, particularly for Western Louisiana. That's where I put mine. But again, it could be for the whole state of Louisiana. I can't really pinpoint that exactly, but if we were looking for a major landfall in August, it would probably be Louisiana once again. So, with Laura, we saw major hurricane in August. It looks like we could see another major hurricane for Louisiana in August as well. But this is just, again, the intensities here, that's me. That's all me. That's not the LRC. The LRC is these cycles that you see. So the intensities here, that was just me. That was my thinking on the situation. What you really need to look at, though, is the cycles. The cycles. And the cycles that are strongly, cycling are the ones that have those asterisks. So eta, delta, zeta, those are all strong cycles. And then you have the 1120 1120 part of the cycle, and you have the 1019 part of the cycle. Those 5 cycles are all very strong cycles, and those are the ones that are special, and you're going to continue to see with the asterisks on. So if we go to September, again, those same cycles, 1019, the Zeta part of the cycle and the Eta part of the cycle, those are very strong cycles that we're going to have to watch out for. Again, by this time of the year, it's prime in the Atlantic. So there's a possibility that this one could become major. There's a possibility that this one could become major. We don't know. We can't pinpoint the intensity of each cycle. There's just no way to do that as of right now. But we can pinpoint the cycles, and we can pinpoint where it could go, and we can pinpoint the date, okay? We can't pinpoint the intensity or whether it would develop, but we can pinpoint the cycles, and that's exactly what this is. I'm pinpointing the cycles for these months, and again, that's for the month. Now this is where the prediction ends, because I cannot look at October and November, because again, a new cycle establishes then, a new and unique cycle establishes. So I cannot predict for that. But again, climatology says that October favors Florida. So Florida may be under the gun in October as well. Now, this is my forecast for landfalls, and these are generally the hotspots that I'm predicting this year. And this is really important because with the LRC, you could do a lot, and this is what strongly correlates with the LRC right now. Louisiana, western coast of Florida down to the south tip of Florida there. Those are the 2 areas that are going to be the hotspots this year, and those are the areas that will most likely see the most hurricane landfalls. And these are the areas that will probably see major landfalls if we do see some, which I think we will. Now, it doesn't mean that Texas cannot get hit, okay? And it doesn't mean that the east coast of Florida cannot get hit, and it doesn't mean that the northeast cannot get hit. But the chances are generally average to below average at this point. Right now, the favored hotspots would be Louisiana and Florida, the west coast. And then the secondary hotspot again would be Louisiana in the Outerbanks region. So those are my hotspots. Those are the landfall probabilities. I mean, this is just for any landfalling storms. You can see in those red areas, 85%. So it's nearly just, it's going to happen. We're going to see landfalls in those areas. It's just how strong will they be? We just have to wait and see. But because it's going to be an active year, the chances of us seeing a major landfall increases drastically, right? Because it's going to be an active year. So okay, so this is a wide shot of my hotspot locations, and you could see it shows you the places at risk in the United States and the Caribbean, and it's very similar to the last hotspots that I just showed you in the United States. I can take this a step further by looking at the Caribbean and those areas that have a higher chance to receive a landfall. So, these risk areas, the red ones, correlate well with the LRC. For example, the 1019 pattern that started like in the Straits of Florida around the Keys and moved into the West Coast. That is why, northern Cuba and I guess you could say the southern Bahamas there, the central southern Bahamas, and including the West Coast there in South Florida. That's why those 3 areas are at a higher risk or an above average risk or way above average in my definition because of that 1019 cycle. And I could show you that cycle right here. So you can see this was the 1019 cycle. It started kind of in the Cuba region, north of Cuba, and that's again why they're at risk this year. And then you can see how that low lifted up into the West Coast. And this is just a 2-day time period, so you can see how it traveled, and by October 21st, it was up there at the West Coast. And that's again why those 3 areas there, the Bahamas, northern Cuba, and the west coast of Florida, those 3 areas are particularly hot spots. We can go back to this now, and also if you notice, there's a hot spot on the Yucatan, and this is because really the risk of the cycles of Delta, Zeta, and the 1120 part of the pattern, all of those cycles started in the Caribbean and lifted up to the northwest towards Louisiana. And 2 of those cycles, believe it or not, made landfall in the Yucatan, Delta and Zeta. So that's why the Yucatan in particular is at a high risk as well this year. And then some other areas that I didn't mention, they're not in the red zone, but they are still high areas. They include the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, and the kind of like the western tip of Cuba near the opening of the Yucatan there. And I put these areas in an above average risk, but they too need to be watched very closely, as well as the red areas. And the reason why those areas, the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, and I guess you could say the southern Cuba, the western tip, Eta correlates well with this because, again, it too started in the Caribbean but moved north, hitting Cuba from the south, right? And then Eventually, it headed up the west coast of Florida after doing a loop. But the main takeaway from this is that the areas in red will likely be impacted this year from a tropical cyclone, most likely, and the areas in green are generally at a below or average risk this year for seeing a system, and that includes the Texas coastline, the east coast of Florida, and the Northeast. But it does not mean that those areas cannot get hit. We will be watching this closely, as we are right now, with potential cycling of the 1019 part of the pattern that would impact the Gulf Coast, you could say in the west coast of Florida, around June 7th to the 13th. And we're already starting to see hints of that on the Cfs model, and it's been consistently showing this one area trying to come out of the Caribbean. You know, it could be the Zeta part of the pattern. That's a possibility. The model has been the model is trying to figure out when it will happen, but if it happens a little bit later, if it happens between the June 13th and 16th time period, then we really have to actually watch out for the central Gulf Coast, which would be Louisiana. So we're watching both of those zones right now. Those two red zones, we're watching actually both of those right now. If the cycle cycles early June, then it would be the 1019 part of the cycle, and we would have to watch for the West Coast. If it cycles mid-June, then we would have to watch for Louisiana and the central Gulf Coast. For the Zeta part of the pattern, that would be kind of eastern Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. So those are the areas that we're watching for early and mid-June. Now, it doesn't mean that these two are going to develop. Most likely, one of those cycles are going to develop. Which one develops? We can't say yet, but there is going to be favorable upward motion happening during the early to mid-June time period, and that is why we most likely will see some development. It's just which cycle will develop. Well, we're going to have to wait and see. But I've been calling this now for quite a while. That we were going to see June development, early to mid-June development. I've been calling this for a while now. It's not surprising because of what the LRC establishes, and we knew this over the summer because again these cycles were cycling, so we knew this over the summer ahead of time. So again, these are my areas. This is the areas at risk, and we need to watch these areas very closely, and I will continue to watch these areas very closely throughout the season. I've created other maps that look at the whole Atlantic basin and show you the areas where we're going to have average activity, above average activity, and slightly above average activity. And again, this correlates well with the LRC. You can see the areas that are our hotspots are generally that red areas. So anywhere from Western Louisiana all the way down to South Florida, the south tip of Florida, those are going to be our hotspots this year. Those are where we're going to see the most landfalls within that zone. And that correlates well with the LRC. And then we can go on our track map, and these are the tracks. So you could see that a lot of these cycles that we see are correlating well with these tracks, right? So you could see, for example, the 1019 cycle, that one curves up into central Florida. Then you could see maybe a Zeta part of the cycle, that one happens and hits Louisiana. You can see Delta there. So you can see cycles that are similar. You can see paths that are similar to those cycles. And again, they're not always going to be identical. They're not. But this gives you an idea where our hotspots are going to be and what the landfalls may look like for June and July. Now, do I expect many hurricanes during this time? I don't. Near the end of July, I think we could see one. But that's what my forecast was calling for. So I'm calling for one hurricane during July, and that's usually about average. I don't think we usually see any more than that during an above average year usually. Now, things start to change when we get into August and early October, obviously, because that's the peak. And it starts to get very active in the Gulf of Mexico because it's just like a bath over there. You have the above average zone kind of in the northern Caribbean, up the east coast. I cannot rule out a storm impacting the Carolinas, and curving up into the Carolinas, but for the most part, I don't think it's going to happen because there aren't any cycles doing that. There are, though, cycles cycling off the east coast of the Carolinas. So there could be some cycles off the east coast of the Carolinas that cycle. And there could also be storms that get very close to the Carolinas that impact the west coast of Florida. Because, again, if a storm's impacting the west coast of Florida, it has to move north, and then that means it's moving towards the Carolinas. So it could just go on the other side and head out to sea, or it could impact the Carolinas. So we have to wait and see for that. So the Carolinas is particularly hard to forecast, but we could see a few landfalls there. But the main areas are going to be Louisiana and the west coast of Florida. Now, a similar analog that I defined this year was actually 2004, and there's good reason for that, because if you think about some of the storms that happened that year, we had Charlie that impacted the west coast of Florida, and we had Jean and Francis, those ones impacted South Florida, and then we had kind of Ivan that impacted the, I guess you could say that's the Zeta part of the cycle, right? Because we had Eastern Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. Those are the hotspots for that cycle. So for the most part, 2004 does correlate well with this, and 2004 also had long track storms that were in the Northern Caribbean. 2004 is a pretty good analog in terms of landfalls, okay, which is not good because 2004 was not a good year, especially for Florida. It wasn't. But again, Florida and Louisiana are going to be the two hotspots, and I just feel bad because, you know, it sucks because Louisiana got hit very hard last year with multiple storms, and that's going to happen again this year, and that can't. I mean, that's what the LRC is forecasting. So now, when we put on the tracks again, pretty similar to June and July, right? The tracks correlate well with the cycles that we're seeing establish and repeat over and over again. In August through early October, we're going to see storms come from the main development region and travel along the Northern Caribbean. Some will go out to sea, obviously, but I don't predict that because they're going to go out to sea. They don't affect anyone. But I do think we could see some subtropical activity near Bermuda. I think there could be some storms off the East Coast moving out to sea. I think there could be maybe a storm that recurves and gets close to the Carolinas. I don't think it'll make a landfall, but I think it could get close. And then again, in the Gulf of Mexico, you could have storm tracks anywhere in the Gulf of Mexico, really. Anywhere from Louisiana, the western Louisiana coast, all the way down to South Florida. You could have landfalls anywhere in that zone, but the main areas, again, are Louisiana and the western coast of Florida. So that was my 2021 hurricane forecast video. I hope you enjoyed it. Depending on how accurate this forecast was, will determine if I do another forecast next year. If it wasn't that accurate, then I'm probably not going to do another forecast next year. But if it was accurate, I'd say, then yes, I would do a forecast next year. Again, the summary of all of this video really is Louisiana and Florida, particularly the west coast down to South Florida. Those two areas are going to be the hotspots. And again, this year could be just as bad as 2020 in terms of landfalls. So not named storms and hurricanes and major hurricanes, but in terms of landfalls, this year could be just as bad, as I'm forecasting 4 to 5 hurricane landfalls and 2 major landfalls, because of what the LRC establishes and what it's favoring, right? The LRC is favoring the Gulf Coast, from Louisiana down to Florida. So that's the reason why I'm forecasting those hurricanes and major hurricane landfalls. But that's typically what you would see, I guess, in an active season. I mean, we're in an active era, so it's not surprising, with an active season, you're going to have those landfalls, most likely. So I will have some more updates on the potential cycle that could develop upcoming early July. That would be the 1019 part of the cycle. I'm going to have more updates on that cycle, as well as the other cycles that will cycle this month. I will continue updating you, and during every month, I will be posting a monthly prediction just of where we need to watch. So for June, I'm going to be posting the monthly prediction for July, and you're going to see a very similar pattern. Every month you're going to see Louisiana and Florida under the gun in terms of landfall locations. Those are going to be the two areas. So feel free to ask me any questions on my Twitter if you want to message me on my Twitter, or you can just say it down in the comments. I'm happy to answer questions if you have any. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time when we talk more about the upcoming 1019 cycle that could impact Florida.